Today we're going to revisit major themes in literature. There tend to be certain recurring themes among writers. These themes are not always perspectives that we might be comfortable with. In fact, they might be very much against what we personally believe. But when we are trying to analyze literature, particularly when you hit AP language and AP literature, you're going to have to understand what another perspective is, even if it is contrary to our own perspective. So we need to talk about the recurrent themes so that you're going to be able to approach a piece of literature with the idea, one of these 9 themes, one of these 9 contrasts we're going to talk about between themes might be what I'm dealing with here. And this will help you overcome your own particular bias so that you can objectively analyze another piece of literature. Major themes that are identified. Most writers are going to be against big government and the overall societal structure. They're going to tend to be for the individual. They will be against organized religion and for personal or individual faith. Against conformity, for self-expression, against technology typically, for nature and a return to natural ways of living, against war, for peace, against materialism, for relationships, against pride, which we call hubris often when it leads to your destruction, and it does for most writers, for humility, against alienation or marginalization of certain groups. Alienation, you'll remember, means to push out or make someone feel unwanted, unincluded. Marginalization, from the word margin, that means you are pushed out to the edges, and that can be people or groups in society. And they will be for inclusion, in particular multiculturalism. And alienation can lead to disenfranchisement, which we've already discussed. If you are enfranchised, you have a voice, you have a vote, you make a difference. But if you are disenfranchised, you are dispossessed. And they will be, these writers, for empowerment and enfranchisement. Now let's look at each of these just a little more in depth. We have gone over this once before, so we are revisiting this in more depth. Writers are typically against big government or big versions of societal structure and control. They are for the individual. We can think of the poem A Raisin in the Sun, which talks about big societal structures that doom certain groups or elements to poverty and the inability to achieve their dreams. That would be one example of this. Another, organized religion. They're going to be typically against anything that is a big structure, you'll notice, and for personal faith. Now, as much as we did not really, probably most of us, care for Jim Casey and the Grapes of Wrath, you could see where he was against organized religion, Jim Casey, and he went out and did his own thing. And we looked at the Christological figure of Jim Casey. We might not be comfortable with that perspective, but this is a typical perspective of a writer. They are against conformity. They believe people should have their own forms of self-expression. Maybe think back to A Painted House that we read this summer, and the fact that that one house was painted to stand out, to be nonconformist. Against technology and its potential destructive impact on the environment. Think of Lord of the Flies and the technology that led to war instead of peace, which leads us right to the next one, which is against war. And you could see in Lord of the Flies the war that it was born out of greed. The greed was born out of a desire and abuse of power, which led to the destruction of the entire island and its society. Against materialism, typically writers are, and for personal relationships. When you think of this, you can think of the emphasis on relationships that we've read about, particularly in everyday use, where they're focusing on the relationships where she is focusing not on money, but she's focusing on material objects. And again, pride versus humility. We have that in everyday use, where we have Dee versus Maggie. Alienation and marginalization. We can think, of course, of many groups in The Grapes of Wrath, the photo essay by John Steinbeck of the Okies. Inclusion, think in terms of Simon being excluded in what they did to him. And last of all, when you're alienated, you often are disenfranchised. And we looked at that in light of A Raisin in the Sun, the photo essay about the Okies by John Steinbeck. And in particular, if you remember our little picture book, that was the microscopic look at disenfranchisement, which was Horton Hears a Who. Now, leading from that, let's talk about why are there recurring themes in literature. Think just a moment. What does this say about the nature of writers and their role in society? Why do they typically have these unique perspectives and pretty much typically tend to fall in that one category? What is the role that they perceive they have in society? And what I'd like you to do is to take this answer. This will be on your survey, one of the things I'm going to ask you to fill out so that I know that you watched this this week. What books and short stories have you read that exemplify these themes? We're going to do that tomorrow in class, or whenever you watch this. It will be Wednesday in class. It may not be tomorrow. But when you watch this, be thinking in terms of, you don't have to write this, but be thinking in terms of what things have we read, other things that I have not mentioned. And we're going to create a brace map tomorrow. So maybe just be thinking over this, and we'll do it first thing when I see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.